Hey gang, I didn't know you were already there. Hello, my name's Dan, and I'm going to finish, or nearly finish anyway, a little architectural rendering I'm doing for a client. I did the beginning of it in pen and ink. You can see that broadcast a little while ago. And I'm going to finish with watercolor and gouache. But let's get official. This is old habit. Dan's Art Adventure, number 17. Woohoo! On our way to 1,000. Don't hold your breath. All right, forgive me once again. I'm going to put a blinder on you so I can move your camera to a different vantage point and you can see real well. Hang on. Twisty, twisty, twisty. If I didn't blind you, you'd all go dizzy. All right. Well, let me get the power plugged in so the battery doesn't die mid-broadcast. All right, so there's my working space. And as you can see, here's the watercolor. Wait, which way do I turn it? There we go. Let's zoom in a little bit. There you go. So I finished the pen and ink. All this was done with this simple, cheap, waterproof felt tip pen. And I'm ready to go with watercolor. I showed you just a minute ago my medium small or medium large. Either one is true. My middle size watercolor tray. And because this is not a hardcore, honest, perhaps, watercolor, because I'm going to come back with, oh yep, I thought I might. I need a little bit of soap. Here's a bar of soap. A little bit of soap on that, on the brush, so that it doesn't just bleed all over the place. Because I'm not doing what I would call an authentic, a little more blue down here, watercolor. That means I can come back with opaque mediums. I know the word, you English majors, I know the word is media, but in my opinion, in the art world, that's just confusing. So I will use various opaque watercolor, I will use various opaque mediums. So therefore, I don't have to be careful as a watercolorist normally would be. I don't have to be careful to preserve my whites. Does that make sense? Whew, took me long enough to get the simple concept out, didn't it? There are times when the two sides of my brain, the side of my brain that's trying to paint something and the other side of my brain that's trying to talk, they really do get tangled up. So this technique, of course, of using opaque mediums, essentially gouache, but I might sneak in a few other things. It just makes the whole job of doing a watercolor much, much easier. I'm assuming that makes sense to you. Again, because I don't have to be careful and preserve my whites. Now what I'm doing right now is lifting out some of the lighter values. Whoops, and evidently some of what I used up here in this sky, quote unquote sky, was a staining color. So either my phthalo blue or my viridian green, whatever that green is, it doesn't matter too much. I would like it if I could lift out a little bit more up here, but that'll be dark anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I'm glad down here I'm able to lift out the top edge of that ledge, and maybe here as well. All right, now before I proceed, you can see me wrestling with the paper, and I hate to make loud noise on a broadcast, but I'm going to do it anyway. Now, in the last broadcast, I mentioned that I'm working on single ply Bristol board, which is not ideal for watercolor, but it's okay. You actually get a little more texture, brushstroke texture, when you're working on a smooth surface in watercolor. Okay, here's a trick some of you need to know. There's water in this paper, and I have to dry it from both sides to get it flattened out.
Look at that curl. Woo! I wonder how far they curl out. What do you think? Right, crazy. All right, that means I need to turn it over, right? Okay, that looks pretty good. Again, sorry about the horrible noise. Whew. Really, I am. I don't like that noise. In fact, very often, instead of a hairdryer, I'll actually use a heat gun. Hello, Uncle. Yes, exactly. Dirty laundry on my floor. All right, I'm actually going to decrease this, just curl it a little bit just by running it on the edge of the light table. Right, so now for a while. Now, maybe some of you should take note that I started out this process with a 2-inch brush. That's just because I don't have a 4-inch brush at my elbow. Where to go next? Yeah, I guess I'll go with the green bushes. And once again, please, I'm sure you understand this. This is a rendering, an architectural rendering, an illustration. So the idea is down and dirty. I'm only getting paid but so much. I can't spend hours on this at all. So everything I'm doing is designed to be a quick study. Work fast, get her done. So it's not quite as exacting as, say, a fine arts painting would be. And yet, of course, for my client, I want it to be an attractive illustration. He is using my illustration to sell this project to his client. So if he shows his client a drawing that doesn't look very good, well, the client, a number of things. The client just won't be drawn to it, and secondly, the client may think, well, this guy's not a very good landscape designer because he can't afford a good illustrator, right? So we don't want that to happen. Now, if you were here for my last broadcast, you saw how I really cheated and used a whiteout pen, this thing right here, to do dots, essentially white dots on the foliage, and it is showing up. Of course, I knew it would, but it's showing up in a kind of interesting way on those bushes. And again, I'm totally okay with that. I knew that would be the case. I don't normally do that. I don't normally do whiteout underneath the watercolor, right? Normally wait and do the watercolor first, and then if I'm going to do whiteout, do it on top of that. All right, I'm mixing up some dark reddish brown over here for the ground cover. I think that's a little too dark. Yeah. I typically, when I do watercolors, I typically have a brush in my right hand and a tissue or Kleenex in my left hand. And I use the tissue quite freely. And as you notice, I don't typically paint with two hands. I do sometimes. If I'm doing a great big watercolor, I'll use two hands, but I don't typically do that. I spent 20 or 25 years, depending how you count it, as a full-time illustrator. And I did a lot of watercolor during those years. In fact, to this day, I've spent more years doing watercolor than I have doing oil painting, which is kind of funny, because now, of course, most of you know me as an oil painter. But I did more years as a watercolor painter. Now, it's really interesting to me because I've been doing full-time oil painting, watercolor, I've been doing full-time oil painting essentially since 2004. Started dabbling in it in 1999. So 18 years, perhaps, you could say, I've been an oil painter full-time. That's been my primary focus. So most of my artistic and painting development has taken place during that 15 to 20 year period, right? So that when I go back to watercolor, even though I have many years of experience, I tend not to be as sophisticated, maybe is one word for it, tend not to be quite as sophisticated in my watercolor technique. It hasn't kept pace with my development in oil painting. Now, that doesn't keep me, of course, from trying to do good watercolor paintings. I do. In fact, I offer, it's too bright. Hang on, let's add some blue to that. I do offer to do wedding paintings in watercolor, but I usually, if someone says, which one should I order? I say, well, unless you're a real lover of watercolor, then I recommend you hire me to do oil. But if I'm doing two paintings for your wedding, which happens occasionally, like I do one of the ceremony and one of the reception, then I recommend that I do one of them in watercolor. So I don't shrink back too much from going back to my watercolor roots, even though, as I said, I have developed more in the last couple of decades as an oil painter. Sometimes when I get a hankering, is that a southern word? I think it is. When I get a hankering to do a real super duper realistic painting, I will often revert to watercolor and do watercolor really tight and realistic. It's just a lot of fun. It's like relaxing to me. Okay, there's a patch of grass actually in this design down here. So my thinking, my mindset in this watercolor is essentially sort of blocking in. I'm as you can see, I'm doing the big areas first, and then I'll come back and do more detailed watercolor. Oh, I just realized the top of these rocks, they should be lifted out. Right? The stone on the pavement here is called bluestone. It's a flat paving stone. And the same bluestone here on the cap of this wall, and the fireplace, and the top of the fireplace up here. All that's matches. Once again, I will be doing light highlights in opaque gouache, and it's even possible I might use that whiteout pen again. I do that sometimes. All right, almost ready. Whoops, almost ready to go back and start doing a little bit of detail in the watercolor painting. I guess that's what I'm doing right now, starting with the bluestone, flagstone pavers down here, laid out in an irregular grid, as you can perhaps tell. And I'm making the stones, second time my brush has hit that light, so let's just move it up a little bit. I hope my client's okay with this. I think I'm probably exaggerating the variation in tone. I think in reality these paving stones are almost all exactly the same color. And if he wants me to fix it, I certainly will. But what I'm trying to communicate with, I'm trying to give the impression to the client of that these are separate stones. So I might be exaggerating the variety of color there a little bit. All right, I think I'm ready to go to some darker details in the bushes now. Let's make them a little bit more dimensional. Again, my light is coming from the upper left, so my shadows are in the lower right of all these objects. And then let's do some, again, as you can see, just working pretty quickly. I'm almost over budget time-wise on this rendering already. By the way, I think working as a freelance illustrator was the best possible training. I want that water to run the other way here. It's not running very well, so let's blot the edges here. If you have a young person in your life who's thinking about making a career, now the world of illustration is quite a bit different now than it was years ago. The computer and Photoshop and Google have all made drastic inroads to that industry. Yet still, there are people making a living as illustrators. You have to be a good artist. You have to typically have to be able to do realistic stuff, unless you go the, weird, the weird route, and that some people do, and it works well. So. But if you have a young friend who wants to be an artist, I wouldn't recommend they try to be a quote-unquote fine artist. Very, very few people can make it as
as an artist, a fine artist. So if you have someone, I recommend they go into one of the fields that has the word design in it. If they're a good artist, encourage them perhaps to become a graphic designer or a landscape designer or a fashion designer or an architect, or all those areas you can actually make a living at. It's artistic, but it's not quite as what's the word, challenging as trying to make a living as a fine artist. I'm very blessed indeed. Now, for the last year and a half, so some of you regulars know, I'm actually not a full-time artist anymore. I'm a part-time musician and a part-time pastor of a small flock, hardly a church that anybody would recognize, but we do receive some financial support from our endeavors there. So I'm not even a full-time artist anymore. Almost. I'm about a 3/4 time artist. All right, I'm going to do some of this wrought iron fence made out of aluminum. Oh, by the way, you're seeing a little trick here that somebody should probably notice. Now, my whole career, I was a watercolor major in college, and so that was over 40 years ago. My whole watercolor career, I've been hopelessly hooked on flats. As you can see, I've done all the painting here. I may not use a round brush in the whole thing. Now, that isn't necessarily, that just may be me. I do know that a lot of other watercolors are the same way, but not all are. There's some really good watercolors who use round brushes quite a bit. But what I do want to point out is that in watercolor in particular, anytime you want to paint straight lines, absolutely do it with the flat edge of a flat brush. Not, you don't take a round brush like this, for instance, and at least I don't think this is a good idea, and go like this. It just doesn't create as nice of a look, in my opinion. Just don't do that. And the flat brush is much faster, and it creates a more interesting mark. And as you know, if you watch my oil painting at all, I'm bonkers on interesting marks. Now I'm doing trunks of this crepe myrtle tree up here. I think I'm going to paint a few more pickets on this fence that I didn't draw in pen and ink, but I feel like I should have. All right, now back to the stonework. For some reason, I really enjoy painting the texture of stone or a stone wall, or even a brick wall, but stone is much more interesting, and have developed a little bit of facility at doing so. I think part of the secret is not drawing too, or painting too much, keeping it somewhat abstract. That's not a Dan Nelsonism. That's standard art professor talk right there. You don't paint every brick typically in a wall, or draw every brick or stone in this case. You let the viewer's mind finish the picture. Painting with a Kleenex there.
just about ready to graduate to gouache. Well, I might do a little bit with a round brush, maybe. Having just said that I never use a round brush. We'll see. We'll see. Oh, let's paint orange in the fire before I leave the flat brush. Yes, I am gonna do the the typical rendering trick of putting fire in the fireplace. Why not? It'll make it just a little bit more fun. I'll certainly be finishing that with gouache. A little more shadow in the grass here. Oh, Uncle says explain the soap trick. Okay, anytime you're doing a watercolor, actually this applies to acrylic as well. Have you ever had a canvas and your acrylic beads up on the canvas? Yeah, just have a little bar of soap and get a little tiny bit of soap. But liquid soap works too, but this is just honestly more convenient. Then just swipe your brush across the soap and it changes the viscosity, that's the word. Changes the viscosity of the watercolor so that it sticks to the paper and doesn't bead up. That's what was happening there for a minute. Looking. No, I think I'm done with watercolor, really. I can come back to it if I want to. But let's graduate to gouache. I resisted using gouache for many years as a young person, decades ago. This is silly, I know. I resisted using it because I didn't know how to pronounce the word. I saw it written out. Gouache, 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 gosh, gouache, whatever. And that's quite silly. Once I realized that in fact was what I was doing, then I said that's ridiculous, and I started using it anyway. But that's pretty funny that I realized I was avoiding buying this stuff because I didn't know how to pronounce it. So there is my gouache tray, one of two, and I have a box over here somewhere of a new box of gouache. Let me see if I can lay here it is. Lay my hands on that real quickly just so you can see. It comes, of course, in tubes. And it's always nice to have some fresh gouache around, especially white. So I'll buy tubes of white gouache. I'm looking in my drawer over here. I'm supposed to have a couple tubes right there. Oh, there they are. And I'll just buy a tube of gouache, of white, because that's the most important color. Because you want, so often, you want white or you want very opaque colors. And that's one of the advantages, one of the nice things about gouache. It's very opaque. Of course, it's water-based, so it reactivates it. Unlike acrylic, it never settles down. In other words, it's always fugitive. You know, you'd have a gouache painting that's 100 years old, and if you splash water on it, it's ruined. So be careful, because it is never stable. All right, where to start now? I'm just going to start sort of with the thing that catches my eye first and most, which is these bushes. So I've already sprayed all of these paints, but I'm going to spray them again. It takes several minutes for them to get good and malleable, good and soft. That's why I sprayed them a little while ago, but when I looked at them just now, they all looked hard again. No problem. And let's turn this around because I'm going to be focusing on the green for a while. And now, look at this. I am using a round brush. And I'm just going to do some quick highlights on the sunny side of all these bushes. One of the challenges of gouache is that it doesn't dry the color like watercolor. It changes color quite a bit while it dries, so it's a little bit hard to guesstimate what color it's going to dry. And you just make adjustments as you go. And I will almost certainly put flowers on these bushes. Again, I want it, it's supposed to be a pretty picture, right? This is not the world of fine arts. This is a world of marketing, selling, advertising. And if my client shows his client a parody picture, then obviously the client. Now I think that this job is pretty much a done deal. There's not a high risk of him canceling at this point, I don't think. But my client, he often uses my work as sort of a little insurance. If he shows them, which reminds me, I'll do it right now. Which reminds me, by the way, I always sign these things, not because I think they're important or I have an ego problem. I sign them because marketing. If my client's client sees a signature, goes, "Ooh, I mean, this is real artwork. It's not like something somebody did on a computer." Nope, it's real artwork done by a real person. Oh, not that, no, I don't want to get into that argument. But it just adds a little bit of authenticity, weight, if you will, to the project. I'm using a different color green to highlight these evergreen trees. Very often, my client will tell me exactly what kind of bushes he's going to plant. He did not in this case, so I'm left to my own devices. I want to show you, I've worked so much for this client that, in fact, I have several pages and need more of various kinds of plants that he'll tell me. He said Chindo viburnum, oak leaf hollies, azaleas, blah, blah, blah. So I printed these out and laminated them so I have them right at my fingertips, because I am not a horticulturalist. So I have no idea what he's talking about almost no idea. So I've done a bunch of research. And of course I still often have to grab my phone and look up, what? He tells me the name of something and I go, what in the world is that? And then sometimes I'll print another page of reference, of course, or include it in my next page. There. Now, do you see those bushes? They're really starting to look like little bushes, aren't they? Hello, Nielsen Franklin. Good to have you speaking up. Cool, Uncle. I'm reading your recipe. That looks good. Hello, John Rope. There you go. Yeah, I hope this helps you. By the way, oh no, Uncle, yeah, don't throw it out. Absolutely, old gouache can be reused again and again and again. I mean, some of the stuff on this tray is probably 15 or 20 years old. It's been there forever and never cleaned it. All right, let's leave the bushes behind for just a minute, and let's turn this around again just so you can see what I'm dipping into. Here's a row of this, by the way, this tray doesn't quite measure up to my the degree of order I typically like in my palettes, but too late. And maybe it's just evolved that way over the years. Maybe it started out orderly and it's gotten disorganized through the years, and I'm not going to take time to, I would never clean that off. That'd be a
horrible waste of time and money. And I need a smaller brush here. I was going to say, if you want to see some good, really good gouache painting, James Gurney, Gurney, James Gurney. In fact, he's the best I know of doing gouache on YouTube. James Gurney, you might know that name, or you might wonder, why does that sound familiar? He's actually quite the famous illustrator. Very good, very, very, very good. That's a little bit too much. That's a little bit too little. I put some on and it's too much. I take some off and it's too little. What I'm doing here is opaque. Well, I'm doing gouache, so I don't have to tell you it's opaque, right? You know that. I'm doing opaque gouache, light brown on top of these stones. Again, so this is very different from doing what I would call legit or traditional watercolor, where you build up your values little by little from white, and be careful to save your whites, all that kind of stuff. I love painting that way, but it's very tedious and more time consuming. So that's why I use this technique for an illustration, for a cheap, quote unquote, for a cheap illustration. Working with opaque mediums is quite a bit faster than working with traditional watercolor. Oh, so I was telling you about James Gurney. He's famous mostly for writing a book called Dinotopia. That'll be in your local bookstore, Barnes & Noble, or, of course, it's on Amazon. Dinotopia, just a visual feast. And James is a good teacher, and he's very generous with his sharing his techniques with all of us, which I appreciate very much. So look up James Gurney and follow him if you want any encouragement in gouache. There's another guy, dead guy. Hang on, I'm going to stand up over here for a second. See if I can lay my hands on this book. I hope I can find it. I'd love to show it to you. It's 19th century French, or early 20th century perhaps, Paris street scenes done in gouache. Oh man. Sorry. Sorry, this is terrible broadcast, isn't it? Oh, rats, I'm sorry. I'm not saying it's a really thin book. I just found it online and ordered it. It's just a little disappointed with the size of the images. Okay, sorry. I can't find it. I'm sorry. False alarm. Anyway, it was 19th century or early 20th, perhaps, early 20th century traditional, just like what you think of probably when you think of Paris street scenes, a lot of wet sidewalks kind of thing. Very, very well done. All right, now I'm doing a pale dull blue for the sun on the top of this ledge. Also cleaning up some of the confusion that I created here with the whiteout pen that I used back in the pen and ink phase. It worked better on the bushes than it did down here on the bricks. All right, now I have nearly pure white on my brush, just to create some pop, some sparkle. My painting is a little bit dull at the moment, so this will go a long ways to fixing that. Dull in values. I mean dull, lacking the sparkle that white or almost pure white gives. So I'm re-wetting a little pile of white gouache right here. And this is where it's often convenient to have a brand new tube of gouache that you can put out, because it's some sort of hard to get just the degree of whiteness that you'd like by re-wetting white. So again, that's why I buy white gouache 10 times more than any other color. Let's do some real bright green down here on this grass. Get just a little bit more pop, or sizzle, sparkle. There, that's nice. And maybe some orange on the fire here. Oh, by the way, while I'm doing a poor man's watercolor, cheater watercolor, let me and for those of you who want to do sort of legit traditional watercolor, there are a couple tricks that I've learned use for cheating. That is to say, using opaque mediums in a watercolor. And if you'd like your painting to look like it's traditional, what I call legit technique, one trick that you can do is, which I don't know if I'm going to do it here or not, but is to do the watercolor, then opaque gouache, then come back and do watercolor on top of the gouache. Be careful not to brush twice. You can brush it one time and then let it dry before you brush it again. But the result then is it's quite difficult for anybody to tell that you used an opaque medium if it has transparent water. So that's just a little trick. All right, I'm going to do some flowers on some of these trees. First of all, I'm going to make this up here a crepe myrtle. And crepe myrtle comes from white to violet, basically. And so I'm going to do to me seems like the most traditional. Are there blue crepe myrtles? I don't know. Anyway, I do want to show you a really helpful trick for painting flowers in any medium. Watercolor, well, no, not watercolor. Gouache, acrylic, and oil. I'm trying to decide what color to make all these. I don't think I want them red. I think that'll draw too much attention to them. All right, I'm going to do small blue flowers. Okay, so here's the trick for painting flowers. Pick your color. I just mentioned I'm going to do blue. And I don't want these to be too big. So I don't want to distract the client too much. And saying, God, well, I don't like blue flowers, so I'm going to try to keep them a little bit subtle.
but I'm going to make them all the same color. I'm not going to do a variety of colors. I think that would draw too much attention to this thing. I'm making this up. In other words, my client did not tell me what kind of bushes these are, so these are just standing in as, you know, your basic pretty flowering shrubs. These just happen to be flowering in blue. But here's the trick I wanted to tell you. I have on my brush a medium dark blue. Dark in quotes. It's the dark side of a flower. Where's my camera? There we are. Can you see that? All right. So over all those little bushes, then, and this actually work a lot better if it's dry. So bear with me just a second. I'm going to dry the blue dots I just put down there. Hang on. All right, that didn't take long. So here's the trick then. You follow up the dark color, in this case blue, with a light blue. And you come back and do light blue, sometimes on top of the very flowers that you just rendered. Other times up here on the sunny side of the bush, the upper left-hand side, I'm adding blue flowers that I didn't even paint in the dark color. In other words, you do the dark color of the flower, follow up with the light color of the flower. And again, someone might say, none of you guys would, but someone might say, well, can't you do it the other way around? Couldn't you do the light color and then follow up with the dark? The answer is no. And then somebody says, why not? Oh, and we don't have time. I explained this because the human eye doesn't like seeing dark paint on top of light, but we do like seeing light paint on top of dark. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I could explain a little bit more about why the human eye does that, but if you don't understand it, just trust me and do what I say until you're a lot better painter than me. Then you can do whatever the heck you want. But okay, so there's a good tip. The dark side color of the flower first, followed up by the light color of the flower. And then it looks great. You can do the same thing up here in the crepe myrtle in just a minute. It'll be funny if this client would say, you know what, I like that. I want you to do those kind of bushes. I want those kind of flowers right there. I hope I'm not getting my client into a pickle. He said, Dan, those are beautiful flowers, but they only bloom in September every year. So I don't think my client's going to like it. Like I said, I hope I'm not getting him in trouble. All right, now back to the crepe myrtle up here that were a fuchsia color, purplish red. I'm following up now with a pale pink, again, slanting toward the upper left-hand side of each flower, right? Because the light is coming from the upper left. And that means some of these flowers over here won't get any pink on them. Why? Because they're in the shade, right? They're in the shady side of the bush. I'm looking. Okay, one thing I certainly need to do, and that is to add a little bit of texture down here in this ground cover. So basically it's just dots and specks of light opaque brown. And again, forgive me, I know I'm being redundant. If I say light, that means opaque, and if I say opaque, it means light. When you're in the world of opaque medium, now that's not watercolor, of course, but yeah, that looks much better. And I think, now that I've gotten this far, I think that I need to add more light to this chimney, the stonework, and it feels a little bit too dark. So I will go back and look at that in just a minute when I'm finished. Oh, another trick. Hello, Lynn Beasley. Glad you got me. Hello, Doozy. Yeah, Uncle, the 6-foot watercolor I did, yeah. It was actually 36 by 48. I think that's the one you're talking about. Yep, client liked it, took it, bought it. So, Yahoo. Yeah, that was a doozy. Yeah, so so for some reason, the stone on this is just a little too muddy color. So I'm busting out my tube of white gouache and putting it here in this well with brown gouache. Okay, so that's because the brown that was there just was too dark, and it would have taken me too much time to transfer, to light, to vivify, to bring this gouache to life, and then transfer it down here. So there's a good example of why do I keep a separate tube of, or tubes plural, of gouache always available. And that's why. So I could do this. One of the nice things about gouache, of course, because it never stabilizes. Like watercolor, you can lift it off fairly easily. So I'm going to go ahead and do a whole bunch of this fireplace. Try to get the whole thing bumped up to the value that I think I'm looking for. It's just kind of, it's too close to the color of the background. Really the value of the background. So I'm making it all quite a bit lighter, but of course still treating it like it's made out of stacked stone, which is the technique that is being used to build this. See, I think what I'm doing right now might end up being a little bit too speckly. If so, I have a couple tricks I can do to try to de-speculify it. Dedodification is what we normally call that around here for you old timers. Dedodification. But I'm not going to make that judgment until I finish the whole thing, and then. So there's two things I can do to dedodify this, the face of this fireplace. One is I can mix up a more transparent, that would be a translucent batch of white or light brown gouache, like I'm using right now, but just more watered down, and wash it over the whole thing. The other thing is I could just take a damp tissue or a damp brush or spray this and dab the whole thing. And I'm not sure which of those to do, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to dry what I just put there so that it's a little more stable, and then that'll give me a second to decide what to do next. Okay, hang on. Okay, I think that's enough. I think I'm going to try, the first thing is more watered down and hit some of the mid-tone areas, the dark areas that I skipped a minute ago. Let's see if, because I think this would be the fastest approach. If I do like translucent wash over the whole thing, which would definitely de-dodify. It would make it smoother. But if I do that, I will lose virtually all of the pen and ink, or almost all the pen and ink, and I'm not sure it'll fit in with the painting. So let's try this first. I'm sparing a little bit more. So what I'm doing is a more watered down gouache, more translucent gouache, and hitting some of the dark areas, the areas I left dark a minute ago. All right, that's not bad. Yeah, that's quite good actually. And now that I've done that, I discover I need to do exactly the same thing over here. I'm going back 2 steps now. This is my light, very, very light brown, opaque brown. Looks like it's going to take 2 steps, just like it did a little while ago. All right. Am I finished? Not quite. I'm going to do some highlights on the evergreen trees. Let's call them junipers. I did some highlight, but I need to do some higher highlights. I'm going to steal some of the white that I just put in the brown well and take it over for the same reason I explained earlier. It's easier to use straight out of the tube white to make something, to make the gouache much lighter than it is to awaken some dried white gouache. It'll all get used eventually, but this using fresh out of the tube is just faster. All right, there we go. Those trees were a little bit flat. Oh, here, while I'm doing stuff, I'm going to do some sky holes. Talk about cheating in watercolor, right? You can't do sky holes like this you have to leave them white from the get-go. I mean, I could call this done. I could call it quits. I'm just wondering, can I do anything to make it a little bit more pizzazz, a little more pizzazzy? And I'm thinking about touching up the bluestone pavement in the foreground. So I'm mixing up a dull light blue. In other words, not low chroma, add a little bit of brown to it. All right, let's see what that does. One thing that, of course, anytime you use an opaque medium on a painting, it gives you I don't know what color that's going to dry. Let's give it a minute to dry and then see if I like it or not. Anytime you use an opaque medium, you are able to exercise an editorial function because opaque covers stuff up, right? So I use this extensively, of course, in what I call the final edit layer of my oil paintings, like my paintings and so on. And that's why I call it the final edit layer, because I'm using an opaque medium, as I am right now, it lets me cover stuff up. So if there's a line that I ended up with in the drawing that's like, you know what, I don't like that one, and I mean this literally, this one little line right here, I just don't like it that much, or a little blob, there's a blob of paint right there, just it's not coming off right. And there are several of those as I look around. Nothing major, but just let's just cover that one up. Yeah, and okay, the effect that this is having is quite positive, so I'm going to do a little bit more of it. Again, I may be exaggerating the variety of color, but and if my client complains, I'll probably fix that in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is take a picture of this, or no, I'll probably actually scan this into my computer and we'll tweak it in Photoshop. Anything I feel like doing, which is often I will bump up the contrast in a painting like this. But if he comes back and says, make those stones all the same color, again, I would probably could do that pretty quickly in Photoshop and wouldn't even mess with the original painting. Oh, yeah, one more thing. So very often, after I've used a gouache, I know this might sound crazy, or like, what? How many times do you get to cheat? As many as you need. And I'm coming back to the pen. Again, just this cheap pen, not a real pen, just one of these, and just doing whatever, because a lot of the ink, a lot of the line work, of course, was covered up with both the watercolor and the gouache. So just wherever I feel like, I'd like to see a little bit more of that original texture. Don't need to get carried away. Yeah, and I'm very much liking this. Glad I decided to do this. And this is pretty standard operating procedure for me. Even make a few circles in these bushes that kind of look like the outlines of those flowers. When I was drawing them earlier, I wasn't really trying to indicate flowers at all. So this is the second way to sort of mask the fact that you used an opaque medium on your otherwise watercolor painting. This only works, of course, if it's a watercolor over pen and ink. But the trick is, if you've used gouache, say, in this case, come back and do the ink on top of the gouache, and it does a great job of masking, hiding the fact that you cheated. and of course I'm using cheating crazy, because no, this is a very pleasing effect. I don't know if you think it's pleasing. Shut up. I think this illustration, especially even with this last phase, is looking quite peachy. Has just enough flair and flash to make it look like a competent artist did it. It's attractive. Again, we want the client, the final client, the person whose backyard this illustrates. We don't want him to go gaga over the illustration at all. In fact, we really like him to almost completely, other than being impressed with it, like, wow, that's a good job. And so he's impressed with my client, right? Other than that, we don't really want him, and he won't, he or she, unless he or she is an artist or a deep art appreciator, they won't even pay any attention. We just want them to look at it and go, wow, that looks great. Yeah, do that. Yeah, build that. If that's the reaction my client gets, then I have succeeded. Does that make sense? They're not going to say, hey, wait a minute. Did this person use opaque mediums in his watercolor? Wow. What a cheesy way to do artwork. It's not going to happen, right? Not unless the person is a fairly accomplished artist themselves, which the odds of that are pretty slim. Get a little bit more dots and circles, by the way. That's my characteristic style for creating a texture. Dots and circles. All right, are you happy? I'm happy. That's the important thing. I think my client will be happy with that. He usually is very kind and expressive and says wow and stuff like that, usually. I'm not going to hold my breath, but you know. Oh, hey, David Mercer. Oh, yeah, flowers down on the grass, eh? You might be right, David. Maybe for the ladies, I need to add a variety of colors. I'm not going to, though, because my client didn't tell me that these were flowering bushes. So I'm taking a little bit of a chance by making them flowering at all. And I don't want them to get quite that much attention. If they were azaleas, we'd be all over the map. All those fuchsias and reds and purples and so on. You did suggest a darker line. That is not a bad idea, though, right there on the right-hand side of the file there. I'll do that one. I'll take that suggestion. Make you feel better. Yep, that's a good call, buddy. All right, I think I'm done. Thanks, guys, for hanging out with me. Let me zoom in just a little bit so you can see this before I go. Get it cropped about like, not quite that, but close enough. All right, thanks for watching, y'all. Thanks for your chats and comments. Look forward to